Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Protected Speech. Along with Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. We're going to get right into the issues of the day. And first topic we want to get into is Imran Khan, assassination attempt while he was at a rally in Pakistan. Obviously, he's been in the news for a number of months as he was moved out of that perch as prime minister. He's actually the only prime minister in Pakistan history to get removed constitutionally. We've had some very tragic scenarios there over the years with assassinations, of course, Benazir Bhutto being one of them. And you've had Musharraf, General Musharraf is also removed. But Imran Khan's still a very popular figure. If you don't know much about him, he was a cricket star and kind of an international man of mystery, so to speak, because he did have a global profile. So I don't know if this is surprising news to you, but certainly it's consequential, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's incredible that this is still happening in that region. Of course, Pakistan, a volatile region right now, also dealing with a lot of natural disasters, dealing with historic flooding. So a lot of tragedy in that region. But then to have something like this happen just adds fuel to kind of this chaos that just continues in that country. But yeah, it seems like the alleged shooter, again, had a beef with Khan. Khan was out there protesting, leading a convoy of a lot of protesters on the ground wanting, I guess, quicker elections out there. And, this happens. Unfortunately, one of his supporters was also shot and killed. Imran Khan, shot in the leg. He's expected to survive. That is the alleged shooter there. He was on camera making some sort of video admission. But again, there's a lot of lack of clarity on exactly what those circumstances really were. If he really did admit to this and say that he wanted to kill Imran Khan, or if it was forced. We know that Pakistan isn't known for transparency or a fair legal justice system. But this is going to be an ongoing story, especially since Imran Khan does not want to go out quietly.
It's an unusual story, but you got to imagine this is when data comes out. I saw different images, of a guy who potentially was the shooter. We see this video circulating on social media. We saw initial reports saying that the shooter was killed on site. Then this video got released with a man who's taking claim. So, this is how sketchy some of this stuff gets, and the news-making process is messy. But this is why it's helpful to have video to at least, so we can kind of figure out for ourselves, who's telling the truth? Was this the actual shooter? Were there multiple shooters? And this is why, frankly, the government and the army is taking a lot of flack. And I think that's the key point of this story. Again, India and Pakistan have both been free for 75 years. I think the key point is the Pakistan army is taking grief over this assassination attempt. And I did see videos online of, Khan supporters, folks that there's one gentleman in particular who had lost his voice. And he basically was screaming at some Pakistani soldiers saying, if you're going to kill Imran Khan, we are going to take back this country. And so if we've never seen resistance from the Pakistani citizens like this to this degree. So it's something to watch. And certainly if you're on the Indian side of the border, the instability of the government in Pakistan is something to be wary of, because you just don't know if there's going to be a coup of some sort happening in the hours, the days, weeks ahead. And I think that this is a flashpoint. Keep in mind, obviously, Pakistan is a nuclear state. And Joe Biden recently said, hey, Pakistan is a dangerous country because of those nukes and because of the political instability. So it's a dynamic situation. And probably by the time you see this video, things may have changed. I mean, that's how real-time things are. And it's something definitely to watch out for.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was going to bring up as well. You're not seeing much, based on what I'm seeing out there, any coverage of this, real analysis from a U.S. perspective, right, in terms of what this really means for the region, what this means for U.S. interests. But again, those nukes, Biden a few weeks ago just simply saying that Pakistan is a dangerous country. And as you can imagine, the leaders there didn't appreciate those sentiments because the U.S. clearly has, leans towards India because they're, again, democracies. India, the largest democracy in the world right now. And the U.S. wants to keep that region stable. But after incidents like this, again, destabilization truly is the greatest threat right now to any U.S. interests and for that entire region.
And for a little bit more context, we had a chance to talk to Neera Tanden, who basically is President Biden's like right hand, along with Ron Klain. And Neera Tanden was like, Biden knows the issues. He knows India. He knows Pakistan. He's been, on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for decades. And so when he makes statements saying Pakistan's a dangerous country, at the same time of issuing $450 million towards F-16s, which has rankled a lot of Indian Americans, a lot of folks within India, this is where you're going to get pushback during the midterms. Now, there's some calculus going on, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, I've heard different criticism of him. I had a chance to interview Brigadier General Don Boldock, who is in the military, knows Afghanistan, Pakistan, that dynamic very well. And in an interview that we're releasing on the Public Interest, our public affairs show, and he's, by the way, really neck and neck in that Senate race in New Hampshire. He basically said that Blinken is kind of an old school Secretary of State, kind of a Cold War mentality. And so this is why Pakistan's getting some money towards F-16s. Meanwhile, they're trying to appease and grow the U.S.-India relationship. So this is also why India is not all in on the U.S. relationship, why India wants to continue to maintain their relations with Iran, maintain their relations with Russia. And certainly there's a lot of people within India that are saying, hey, we need to make sure that India and China continue a cordial relationship, even though they had a border skirmish in recent years, because you just don't know. The American dichotomy changes every 4 years, and we could have another shift in policy after the midterms. So this is going to be.
I think another last point I'm going to make, I think what's an interesting angle here is, again, Pakistan really doesn't have a firm leader in place. Again, adding to this instability right now, because I think the U.S. wants to know ultimately who's going to emerge truly as Pakistan's leader, and will this leader truly care about that region, and of course aligning more with India and the U.S. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but I think that's the other wild card to watch here.
And there are elections scheduled in 2023, so we'll see if that gets moved up. So far, nothing is being changed to accommodate things, but certainly unrest in Pakistan continues. Other big topic we want to get into is affirmative action. This debate has been going on for really our lifetimes and beyond, but there is a Supreme Court case right now being debated. The conclusion we don't know about, but a lot of folks believe this is going to be a major change. I know, Jonathan, you covered this because it involves Harvard University. You spent time, obviously, for many years in Boston covering these topics. Talk about the impact. Asian Americans, are a different part of the calculus when it comes to affirmative action, which, generally was there to help the Black community get assimilated in a better economic way. Let's face it, the poverty level for the Black community is anemic. But talk about the impact on Asian Americans. I'm fascinated to hear how the story's evolved over the last few years.
Look, I'm literally looking at this right now. It's a trending topic on social media. I don't know where to begin, but this has been now going on for several years in the making. This week, the Supreme Court heard arguments against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina. Those two prestigious schools are the plaintiffs in this case, and a group called Students for Fair Admissions is suing, saying that affirmative action is discriminatory against Asian Americans because these Asian American students who are scoring, so high on these SAT scores, straight A students, in many cases are not being allowed in favor of Black and Hispanic students who are scoring on these tests, these SATs, as well as lower grades as they're entering these schools. And interestingly enough, the dynamic, adding further to this interesting narrative, is that the person leading this lawsuit, his name is Edward Bloom. He's known as a quote unquote conservative activist. And he's been accused of using Asian Americans for his own conservative interests. But bottom line, here are the dynamics right now. You've got a group of Asian Americans who say they're being unfairly treated, that let's get rid of affirmative action so we just judge on test scores and grades. Another wrinkle, though, is that Samuel Alito, Supreme Court Justice, recently, and I was just reading this right now, heard an argument as well from one of the attorneys for Harvard, and Alito retorted and asked, hey, what about that personality score? There's actually a personality score, Ravi, that Harvard uses. as part of its entrance exam, and Asian Americans always score at the bottom of this personality test. And Alito asked, what's your standard? What's the standard for this personality test? So bottom line, the Harvard attorney didn't really answer Alito directly, but I think that's the key piece here, that Asian Americans have to deal with this stereotype that we're test-taking machines, that we're nerds, we're docile, we're quiet, and we have no personalities. And again, Harvard now using this personality test, Asians scoring at the bottom, and Harvard saying, well, look, that's part of our entrance exam standard. So because Asians are low there, we can't admit all of them, even though their test scores are pretty high. On the flip side of that, you've got another group of Asians as well who are saying, hey, look, affirmative action, we got to keep it. And it's okay because our Black brothers and sisters have constantly been marginalized, and Asian Americans are doing really well overall. Look at all the Asian Americans who are doctors, lawyers, engineers, so on and so forth. But then retort to that is, well, have you ever been to Chinatown? Have you been to these Asian American immigrant communities where they're barely making it, don't even speak English, working 3 jobs, just trying to survive? So it's really going to be interesting how this plays out. There's still so many dynamics, but this is right in front of the Supreme Court right now. And based on instant analysis, there's a very good chance that affirmative action could be going away.
So this is a dynamic that we've been seeing throughout the country. I mean, we know about the UC system that has an overwhelming amount of Asian Americans. But if you look at the data, and I think this is where the key point of this case is, the data says, okay, Asian Americans as a population have grown precipitously, but we've plateaued when it comes to admission. So they've kind of capped the amount of Asian Americans allowed into said university. And I think that's going to be the big issue here, even though
that's called discrimination. If that's what's happening because of race, that's discrimination against Asian Americans, and that's the beef, right?
And this is where, again, Asian Americans are largely voting for liberal politicians, but you have the conservatives jumping in on this side, and many Asian Americans, including Indian Americans, are jumping on this thing. It happened in Virginia with Glenn Youngkin. Got huge support by the Indian American community because of his education stance. Education is like at the paramount of every parent's list of what they have to get done with their children. So
because culturally as well, in India and China and Korea, Japan, these Asian countries traditionally, education is the means to get ahead in culture and in life. And in those countries, it is based on merit. It is based on merit. It isn't based on race. So you have Asian immigrants coming here and they're like, what? I thought the American dream was you bust your butt, work hard, and if you've got A's and high test scores, you get in.
Well, let's face it. There's a lot of Indian Americans that I know that literally used American universities as safety schools because they couldn't get into the IIT and some of these elite schools in India, because that's talk about a confined admissions process, and the competition's ridiculous with 1 billion people. So you have folks, I got into Cornell because that was my safety school. And that's the reality for so many folks around the globe.
Well, listen to this crazy stat. According to research from Princeton University, students who identify as Asian must score 140 points higher on the SAT than whites and 450 points higher than blacks to have the same chance of admission to private colleges.
Well, I mean, look,
is that fair?
I have a cousin of mine, very talented young man, valedictorian of his high school class, 4-point everything. Couldn't get into Stanford because he hadn't built a startup, right? He got into the UC Berkeley system. But the reality is that this is happening, and it's also demographic based, right? So if you're like an Indian American man in Silicon Valley, good luck getting into Stanford. You got to do something extraordinary. And that's the reality. You can't just be an average 3.8 student. You've got to be like a 4.3 student to get in, because otherwise we do over-index in so many of these schools.
The stats here also say if it was admissions just strictly based on merit, that's, again, just test scores and grades, 43% of the elite colleges and universities in America would be Asian American. That's stunning.
It is pretty stunning. And also it's a terrible situation because you do want to see Black and brown students rise up. We need more Hispanics. We need more Blacks in higher education. They need to get the proper education, but we're obviously failing them along the line educationally. And so it's a terrible issue. And it's hard to imagine what the repercussions will be if the Supreme Court does change the status quo. That to me is going to be fascinating.
And there's the argument as well from the left that will say that, whites, the majority culture are pitting all these minority groups, Asians, blacks, and Hispanics against each other for that small sliver of the pie. Maybe. But at the same time, I think what's going to happen here, they say as well, is if these race-based admissions go away, then white students, there are going to be fewer white students as well, especially the legacy kids who get in because their parents went to Harvard or Princeton or Yale or Stanford. So it's going to be really interesting. This fight isn't over yet, but based on the direction of the Supreme Court with Roe v. Wade, I mean, this could be the next big pillar to fall here in America, and it's going to change the dynamic. And I think already you have groups preparing. At least from the Asian American vantage point, I think what's interesting here is I think if this does happen, what will this ultimately mean, right? And that's something that I think a lot of groups and communities are thinking about right now, because at the end of the day, I think you don't want these schools, at least I wouldn't want my kids going to schools that are majority Asian necessarily or majority white. I want more ethnic diversity. And not only ethnic diversity, but class diversity. And I think that's really important.
That's a big deal, because keep in mind, I mean, half the country doesn't go to college, right? So, and keep in mind, all these elite universities are hiring people with college degrees, usually a master's degree minimum, let alone a PhD. Then, of course, all the federal jobs, right? You want to get a job in the federal government. You want to get a job at an elite corporation. Certain corporations just hire the Harvard guys or the Columbia guys, right? And that's another dynamic here. And part of the issue we have with our country is that, we aren't really taking care of everyone then. And this is why we're having this kind of the strife. And it's just going to continue.
And we're starting to see also groups of people now trying to devalue the college, degree, right? There are people who don't go to college and do fine in life, right? There are people who don't become PhDs and are just fine. So again, I think it's going to be really interesting. But for Asian Americans, this is a big fight. At least the ones I know, the ones who I'm talking to say this is going to be a turning point for the community.
So I know you want to get into the homeless crisis once again. I know this is your general beat, but what do you got for us this time? Because I know this is an everyday story that you're.
It's an everyday story for me, because here in Seattle, you talk to the average resident and they'll say it's public safety and the homeless crisis that they want elected officials and lawmakers to address and deal with. And that's the problem right now. The current policies are just not working. And at least from my reporting and what I'm seeing and hearing on the ground, this it's not just about housing first, right? Where the Democrats for the past decade almost now have said, hey, if you build affordable housing, we're going to build our way out of this homeless crisis. Clearly, if that's not working, at the end of the day, the bottom line is, what is the root cause of homelessness? Well, they're various, but one of them is the drug addiction crisis. You ask the DEA, you ask the ATF, you ask federal authorities, local authorities, state authorities, and they're going to say right now that the fentanyl, right, the illegal drugs are flooding in across the border. Mexican cartels are having a field day right now. Of course, the ingredients now coming from China, depending who you ask. This is China's grand master plan to destabilize America as they play the long game to truly become the preeminent world power. So at the same time, we're losing a generation of Americans who are overdosing and dying. Record overdose deaths in America. It's just unspeakable. So there's this video right now. I'm on the ground every single day here in Seattle at these encampments. And what I've done over the years, just even in the past few weeks especially, is I've really been trying to document their stories and to find out and build relationships. And pretty much every single homeless person that I run into is doing some form of illegal drugs. The drug of choice right now is called blues. They're these blue little pills. They're likely laced with fentanyl. That's what a lot of these folks are overdosing on. And they're telling me right now, they're showing me how to use drugs from beginning, middle, and end, from taking out the pills, adding more fentanyl powder or clear or crystal meth, and then literally smoking it in front of me telling me how they feel, but also why they're doing it. Part of that is there's pain. There's pain in their life. A lot of these men and women come from broken situations, and just life happens, and this is their escape. And the dealers especially know that. So I have footage, a video of drug dealers coming up to these communities, these encampments in luxury cars, and you see their hand coming out, and then you see the exchange of money. I mean, for anyone who knows, I mean, you don't have to be an expert. That's a drug deal. And this drug use in Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest, is just happening on the streets in plain sight. So not only is this detrimental to the addicts who are dying every single day because of this stuff, but also the business owners who have to be around this, the neighbors, and everything else, the crime, the problems that are associated with these camps and everything that it attracts. So it's just become a total nightmare. And I want to play you a clip right now so you really hear firsthand from some of these men who are addicted to drugs.
So do you feel like this homeless crisis is being fueled by drugs?
Definitely.
And because they don't want to help housing.
So housing...
But they don't want housing.
I do.
Housing, but at the same time, how will housing benefit you if you're not sober?
A lot of them, they want to be out here because they're out here getting high all the time.
You made a really good point.
Housing's great, but
How
if
can
you're
you
sober,
get sober if you're still doing the same thing in your apartment?
Yeah, I
You
don't
gotta
want
wanna
housing
change.
if I'm not sober.
Yeah.
All these people, their day is consumed by looking for stealing or their hustle for their money, and the other half of their day is consumed on looking for it and waiting for it.
Is that what you guys do most of the day?
No.
With me?
Yeah, so that's just a quick segment there. Just my interaction with Steven and Mike. I mean, they're nice guys. They're educated. They can hold a conversation, but they admit they're stealing to fuel their habit. At the same time, they're doing it in plain sight. They know they have a problem. At the same time, they're cogent and enough to communicate that if you give them free housing right now, they'd still be doing the drugs in the housing. So you've got to give them this help, this love.
Yeah, Jonathan, tell me about the impact of these programs, right? I just saw something that Governor Gavin Newsom in California is kind of freezing some of his homeless initiatives because he wants to see some concrete results. He wants the local municipalities to demonstrate, hey, if we're spending tens, hundreds, if not billions of dollars to address this grave situation, we need to see concrete results. I mean, who has had success in being able to help these people, and whether it's housing, whether it's job training, whether it's obviously just getting people clean? Is there some city, some area that's had success that we can point to?
Yeah, the New York Times did a piece on Houston being successful in really creating this combination of affordable housing, but also providing the services as well. But for whatever reason, here on the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, it just has not been able to translate. And you hit it right on the head. There's no accountability. It's been a free-for-all. These Democratic leaders have been just asking for more money, throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at this crisis, and there's nothing to show for it. In fact, it's getting worse and worse every single day. It's based on the data and numbers. So I think Governor Gavin Newsom made the right call to at least put a pause and just reflect what's working, what's not. How did we get to this point, and where do we go from here? There's got to be some form of accountability. There's got to be tracking. There's got to be measurements. There's got to be a standard for success. And if something's failing, then so be it. But right now, it's a free-for-all. And that's the problem. That's what's so frustrating for so many out here in Seattle, that you've got this homeless crisis raging out of control, but they're just trying to throw more money at it, but they're not requiring. It's no strings attached housing. I mean, is that going to work? And that's kind of the debate right now on the ground. And this is a blue state, and the Democrats are leading the charge here with these policies, but by all accounts, it's failing.
Well, I know you wanted to get into beyond this topic, the ongoing battle with Elon Musk and his takeover of one of the largest social media companies, Twitter. Take me through what your thoughts on this. Obviously, he's brought in a core team of people to help him change the company over. One of the guys, David Sachs, part of that PayPal mafia, well known now because he's got his own podcast with a few other folks in Silicon Valley that are prominent. And then, of course, he's brought Sri Ramakrishnan, who was involved. He's working at Andreessen Horowitz, very big venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. And he and his wife hosted their own show on Clubhouse and got Elon at the peak of Clubhouse, which I think maybe it's already peaked since they raised a whole bunch of money, got a whole bunch of viewership during the pandemic, and seemingly have tapered off since then. But Elon has brought some trusted people that understand social media, understand networks. But beyond that, I know you wanted to delve into this.
Well, look, it's been a bloodbath, really, here. Twitter employees being fired, let go, and it's going to be a brand new management team. But what really got my attention is Musk tweeting about the reality that these far left activists and these liberals, are now trying to pressure advertisers to pull ads, and it's already happening. Pfizer, GM, two of the biggest, saying recently that they're going to put a pause in their advertising because they want to see what the moderation standards are going to be, and that's moderation for things like hate speech, right? That's the biggest concern, that Elon Musk is all about free speech, but if he starts bringing people back and for saying some outrageous things or disinformation, racist comments, I think these advertisers, especially the ones who are mainstream that tend to align with products that are quote unquote brand safe, they're having second thoughts. So they're waiting for everything to shake out right now. But again, the fact that Elon Musk publicly comes out and puts a tweet there saying, hey, the far left, these left-wing advocates are trying to undercut and undermine my company. That's fascinating. Have you seen anything like this?
Well, look, I think since I run a media company, I think the reality is that brands have to go into venues where they think they're going to be in an environment where it's a relatively safe venue for them to put to market their goods and services, because there's a backlash, right? If you align yourself with certain actors that may be out there promoting misinformation, might be full of hate, etc., no legitimate brand wants to be associated with that. And so you're having this change, this shift in mentality. And so increasingly you have folks that are sponsoring products that, they have a belief system. I think the most famous brand that is kind of counter to some of these big ones is Mike Lindell from MyPillow, right? He supports a lot of conservative media. He was doing a lot of advertising on mainstream networks, but as his politics became more well-known, and then, of course, as his support for President Trump became more vociferous, that seemed to rankle a lot of media executives, and they didn't want to be associated with him, especially as he started to make comments. It wasn't really the product per se, but it was as his personal opinions became.
It was built by association.
Right. I mean, let's face it. If you are, we see what's going on with Kyrie Irving, and how not only did he and the Brooklyn Nets are both giving $500,000 towards Jewish organizations, but the ADL has actually rejected the $500,000 that Kyrie Irving wants to give, because they didn't think he gave a genuine apology. And so then now the Nets suspended Irving for 5 games. That's going to cost him millions of dollars, because the guy makes like roughly $30 million a year.
And by the way, he did finally apologize on Instagram in a statement.
Yeah, exactly.
He was given an opportunity at a press conference, and he didn't do it then. So
exactly. And so the point is, the NBA, which has a pretty brand safe environment, they don't want bad actors in that environment, right? So it's very simple. If you've got a platform like Twitter, they've kind of allowed a free for all. There's a lot of not safe for work kind of activity on Twitter.
That's the double standard that I want to bring up, and I think what supporters of Elon Musk want to bring up as well. Getting back to the NBA, why is the NBA going after Kyrie Irving for these alleged anti-Semitic statements? Which, no doubt, it's not really a statement; it's what he tweeted out, right? He tweeted out a.
But you got to understand. but you got to understand, Jonathan. Kyrie Irving uses platform, right? So when you use your platform, and you could promote anything, you could promote let's feed all the kids around the globe, right? Something innocuous. Let's end world hunger. Let's go for world peace. That's fine. But if you're going to put out there on your platform saying, "Hey, take a look at this video. This is kind of interesting," that opens not just himself up to criticism, but the Nets and the entire league. And you have a league that's a global league that's doing business in different countries. You know, the NBA had a summer league.
We talked about this the other day. Why aren't they doing that to Joe Tsai, the owner of the Brooklyn Nets?
Right. I mean, all
has
of this
not
stuff
said anything about China.
Yeah, all of
That
this
is
stuff is interconnected, Jonathan.
Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps.
Right.
I mean, again, yet no comment about that.
The NBA went to Abu Dhabi this summer, right? And the way the Middle East conducts business is very different than the way China does business, the way folks in Europe, the way the United States. So you got to keep in mind that there's all the stuff that you can dig through if you really want to dig through. And obviously, I know since we cover India a lot, people have problems with the way India conducts itself, right? So all of this goes back to, how the governments are run, who's in charge of making these financial decisions, and going back to Musk. Musk made a financial decision that he thought he could stomach. Obviously, the market has tanked even further since he made that commitment to buy Twitter. Now, again, with the economics of 6 months ago, maybe you can justify the purchase price. But if you have no advertisers, now you're going to charge users at least $8 a month to use certain features. It's going to change the dichotomy. At the same time, everybody has the choice to use Twitter. You don't have to be on Twitter. It's just a website like anything else.
Well, I don't think he anticipated that far-left activists and even some of his own former employees would start going out of their way to pressure these brands to stop advertising on Twitter. And I think that's one of the most stunning developments, because he tweeted that out today. And if he anticipated this, I don't think it would be an issue. But I don't think he built it in. That's my thumb.
I think that's entirely possible. I also think that he did the math in advance, saying, okay, he's a cold-blooded capitalist, okay? He's reducing the workforce by at least 50%, maybe 75%. So he looked at all of that. He's got a lot of top-heavy stuff. They had all these different programs all over the globe. I've heard the Twitter India staff, almost all of them are gone, right? All the corporate comms, they went from like 100 down to 2, right? So when you're getting rid of all the bells and whistles that they've, again, you have 7,500 employees, and I know this as someone that runs a lean business. You get rid of all the bells and whistles when your company is hemorrhaging cash, which it is, and of course his acquisition cost of paying $1 billion annually just for interest is problematic. So is Twitter going to survive? I mean, that's the question they had about Tesla. Tesla almost died, a decade ago and had really struggled. There's a lot of people who are anti-Tesla, but Tesla still found a way because the product is frankly better than other things on the market. And that's why he is, he's been able to do so well with Tesla. And we're going to see with Twitter, is Twitter a superior product to other things online? Keep in mind, there have also recent reports that Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, known as Facebook by most of us, he's lost $100 billion in his own net worth because of some of his decisions. So people are paying the price now. Social media folks are paying the price. Snapchat is struggling. We've seen all of these different companies, Clubhouse, which was big, for 18 months. They've kind of disintegrated.
But I think the difference with Twitter versus all those other social media platforms now is that they're not dealing with this Elon Musk factor. So those other platforms now are dealing with bad decisions like the whole metaverse and also just lack of popularity and people moving on now to places like just TikTok. But I think this is an interesting
right. And by the way, and since you brought up
Twitter.
TikTok, because I know at Diya TV we've seen a lot of growth on TikTok in less than a year. Who is ultimately financing TikTok?
China.
So my point being is you're picking your battles. You're picking your poison, right? Do you like Zuckerberg? Do you like Musk? Do you like China? It's up to you, the consumer.
And that's why we're talking about it.
And going back to Kyrie Irving, the film in question that he pointed to is being hosted by Amazon and Jeff Bezos.
And who's calling out Amazon? Is anyone calling out Jeff Bezos?
Like I said, and of course, and Bezos controls the Washington Post. So again, the
I
billionaires
find
have
it
a lot of
interesting
say.
that very few, if any, are calling out Jeff Bezos for even hosting this controversial documentary that ultimately has led to Kyrie Irving's support of that and now his suspension because of his lack of an apology.
Again, I think a lot of people, let's face it, because of their political ideologies, they're going to say, "Oh, I'm with Bezos, I'm with Musk, I'm with whomever." They choose teams, and you got to look at all the facts. And I think that's a challenge that hopefully, as journalists, we can challenge people. Say, you know what, this is not just about teams. You've got to really dig through and realize, okay, well, how are things getting financed, right? Like how do the networks? Who's actually investing in television networks? Who's really behind the information that you consume, the newspapers, the blogosphere, all this stuff. And then you start to understand, okay, the different layers and why things are a certain way and why certain narratives get out there more than others. And once you start to do that and get that education, which hopefully will help to steer you in the right direction, say, hey, listen, guys, not everything is as clean and above board as you may want to think it is. It's certainly, I think there's much more information today than we've ever had. And I think that's important for people to know that, hey, you can actually find out where your information is coming from if you actually do a little research.
Which leads us to our final point, the AAPI hate. Take us away on that, man.
Well, again, we've covered this beat. We're going to cover it every single episode of Protected Speech. And it's also being sponsored by the California Public Library, a state of California initiative. We do appreciate the support because I think it's very important that we hear about these situations happening all over the country. And once again, we have another episode of just absurd hate where we had a Hindu temple in Edison, New Jersey, Edison being really the heart of the Indian community in New Jersey. And that was targeted. This tweet here by the Coalition of Hindus of North America, you can see that graffiti there, tag there. And what's interesting is this vandalization took place right after a protest. And so that someone wrote "Free Palestine" on that temple there. And this happened just, a handful of hours after there was this coalition of people in New Jersey marching together to kind of build unity. And at the same time, that particular march was interrupted by an agitator named Peter Frederich, who is, effectively, anti-Hindu in all of his rhetoric. Appears to be very anti-Hindu and very anti-India. Certainly, the specific Indian government in place, the BJP and Prime Minister Modi. So it's funny how this incident, this episode, happened right after that protest and right after Frederich was out there. Just basically standing there, but trying to draw attention to himself and his messaging. And we're seeing this increasingly. I know, Jonathan, you get a lot of flack for being the middle of stuff in Seattle, and this guy certainly for his agenda, which is definitively anti-Indian government, the current Indian government, and certainly some of these groups that Prime Minister Modi's been associated with. He's an agitator along those circles. But it's interesting how, again, these are stories 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we probably never talk about. But because we have this instant access to video, we saw Imran Khan getting shot in real time, basically. We saw, we don't even talk about it anymore. It's been a few months, but Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan, getting shot in cold blood just like that. It's, of course, the Pelosi attack, Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, just getting attacked. And we heard about it instantaneously. So this is a wild time, and that's why we want to discuss these matters as fast as we can, because unfortunately we're seeing more and more hate out there, and there's no reason. This is the gentleman I was just talking about, Peter Frederich, out there protesting, and so this is
my point. This is what's so frustrating about seeing this, right? It's like you have this group of peaceful Hindu Americans protesting this vandalism. And then you have this outside agitator just coming in, trying to disrupt it because he's got beef with Hindus. And on top of that, you just don't have the media covering these narratives to really explain what's going on here. And I think that's one of the most frustrating pieces. That's why we can talk about it. We can spotlight these issues. But the average American, even people in Edison, New Jersey, they're like, huh? What's going on here? You've got some random white guy, yelling at a bunch of Hindu Americans. It's just bizarre. It's from a straight optic standpoint.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this gentleman more in the future. I wasn't expecting to spend much time on him on this particular program, but he was amplified by Congressman Ro Khanna, and that has offended a lot of Indian Americans, a lot of Hindu Americans, and so Khanna is trying to put that back in the bag right now because let's face it, we've talked about it on Diya TV that Khanna is planning a presidential run. It's unlikely to be in 2024. At least I spoke to him about a month ago, and he told me, no, I'm not running in 2024. But if something changes, he was certainly, I think, would throw his hat in the ring. But there's no question, 2028, he's in. And just like President Trump is already dropping hints, big hints, frankly, that he's running in 2024. Khanna is another guy who thinks he can be president, and he's putting it out there. But Khanna amplified Peter Frederich's messaging because Frederich is one of these guys that's anti-Hindutva, which has been kind of branded as this kind of violent Hindu movement. But of course, when you talk to folks that are actual Hindus, Hindutva actually means the essence of Hinduism. So they're trying to turn kind of an ethnic phrase into this violent catch-all. And so that's offended a lot of Hindu Americans. And this is why I think in the elections that we have coming forward, if you have politicians, even if they are of Indian descent, if they are going to offend the larger Hindu community, and especially, again, we've seen 80% of Indian Americans vote for Democrats. We're seeing the GOP running after and embracing Hindu Americans. We're going to continue to see a shift. I'm telling you, we've been documenting since 2016. We're going to see this shift continue on. But again, all this stuff is kind of intertwined. And here we are talking about AAPI hate crimes. But this guy, Frederick, has been amplified by a Hindu politician here in the United States who is a liberal. So again, I don't know
if Ro Khanna is not careful, it's going to come back to bite him because he's going to be accused of backing a guy who is ultimately fueling hate against the Hindu American community.
I mean, again, how do you square all this? That's what's fascinating about these debates is that, again, you have, and again, Frederick is going after a guy who is certainly deeply connected with the Hindu community, Raja Krishnamurthy in Chicago. So he doesn't really do anything with Pramila Jayapal or Ro Khanna, but when it comes to Raja Krishnamurthy is a big target of his. And so this is an interesting story that we will be following closely. And again, all happened right after what was supposed to be a peaceful rally. You have this vandalism.
All right. Well, that's looking forward to the next one, man.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. As always, a lot to get into and certainly not enough time to do it. But for Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next time right here on Protected Speech.